A severed head sang prophecies as it floated down a river. This is just one of the unbelievable stories we will uncover today. You are about to explore 30 of the most bizarre myths from the ancient Mediterranean, tales that defy logic and challenge our understanding of the past. By the end of this journey, you will possess a collection of the strangest stories ever told, each one a window into the fears and wonders of a lost world. Why would a goddess spring fully formed from a god's forehead? What secret power allowed a simple priestess to see the future? What ancient anxieties gave birth to a monster that steals children in the night? These are the kinds of mysteries waiting for you. What part of the ancient world's imagination most fascinates you? Deep within a winding maze of stone, a creature born of divine punishment waited. The Minotaur, a monstrous fusion of man and bull, was the terrifying secret at the heart of King Minos' labyrinth. Its origin was a transgression. Minos, ruler of Crete, prayed to the sea god Poseidon for a bull to sacrifice as a sign of his right to rule. A magnificent white bull emerged from the waves, but Minos, overwhelmed by its beauty, decided to keep it for himself. In a fury at this betrayal, Poseidon made the king's wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the animal. From that unnatural union, the Minotaur was born. This was not just a monster, but a walking, breathing symbol of a king's greed and the god's cruel revenge. To hide his shame, Minos commissioned the brilliant inventor Daedalus to build an inescapable maze, the labyrinth, and sealed his stepson inside. But the horror did not end there. To feed the beast and assert his dominance, Minos demanded a gruesome tribute from the city of Athens. Every 9 years, 7 young men and 7 young women were sent into the maze, never to return. This cycle of terror was only broken by the hero Theseus. He volunteered as one of the tributes, vowing to slay the monster. Upon his arrival in Crete, the king's daughter Ariadne saw him and fell in love. She provided him with a simple, brilliant tool, a ball of thread. Theseus tied one end to the entrance and unraveled it as he ventured into the darkness, creating a path back through the impossible twists and turns. After a fierce battle in the heart of the labyrinth, he killed the Minotaur and followed the thread to freedom, ending the bloody tribute. The power of this myth is so enduring that it has a startling connection to the real world. The vast, complex ruins of the Minoan Palace at Knossos, with its countless interconnected rooms and corridors, are thought to be the historical inspiration for the labyrinth. For ancient Greeks, the story explained the mysterious, powerful civilization on Crete that had once dominated the Aegean. The Minotaur was more than a monster. It was a way to understand a foreign culture, to represent the fear of the unknown and the perceived chaos that lay beyond their own world. This tale of a hybrid beast speaks to a deep, primal anxiety about the boundaries between human and animal, order and chaos, a theme that would echo through many more Mediterranean myths. The labyrinth was a cage of stone, but the next myth presents a trap woven from sound itself. Far out at sea, on an island surrounded by jagged rocks and the bleached bones of ships, lived the sirens. These were not monsters of tooth and claw, but creatures of irresistible melody. Often depicted as women with the wings and feet of birds, their voices promised ultimate knowledge and pleasure, a song so beautiful that any sailor who heard it would forget home, family, and life itself, steering his ship onto the treacherous coastline in a desperate attempt to reach the source. Their most famous challenger was the hero Odysseus, as recounted in Homer's Odyssey. Warned by the sorceress Circe, Odysseus knew he could not resist their call through willpower alone. He devised a cunning plan, ordering his crew to plug their ears with beeswax so they would be deaf to the enchanting music. He alone would listen, but he had himself tied tightly to the ship's mast with strict orders that no matter how much he begged, pleaded, or commanded, they were not to release him. As they sailed past the Sirens' Island, the song washed over Odysseus. It was a personal, devastatingly beautiful promise, claiming to reveal all the secrets of the Trojan War and everything that would happen in the years to come. He struggled against his bonds, screaming at his men to set him free, but they, hearing nothing, only rode harder, leaving the haunting music and its deadly island behind. This myth has been visualized in many ways across the centuries. In early Greek art, the sirens were often shown as fierce, bird-like beings, sometimes even playing flutes or lyres. Later, during the Renaissance, their forms softened, transforming into the seductive, mermaid-like figures we often think of today, but their core danger remained the same. What makes their story so enduringly powerful is its psychological depth. The sirens were more than just a nautical hazard. They were a profound metaphor for the temptations that can destroy a person, especially those tied to pride and the desire for forbidden knowledge. Odysseus survived not by fighting the temptation directly, but by acknowledging his own weakness and using his intellect to outsmart it. He understood that some desires are too powerful to face head-on, a lesson in humility as much as in cunning. The siren's song was the sound of hubris, the arrogance that makes a man believe he is the one exception to a fatal rule. But even the siren's deadly harmony could not compare to the music of Orpheus, a mortal whose skill was a gift from the gods themselves. His lyre could charm wild beasts, make trees and rocks dance, and even soothe the fury of the underworld. Yet his story ends not in peaceful triumph, but in a brutal, frenzied death. After failing to bring his wife Eurydice back from the dead, a grief-stricken Orpheus rejected the worship of all gods except his patron, Apollo. This angered the followers of Dionysus, the Maenads, who in a divine frenzy tore the poet limb from limb, scattering his parts across the land. But here is where the myth takes its most bizarre and haunting turn. As his body was ripped apart, his head was thrown into the river Hebrus. It did not fall silent. Instead, it continued to sing, a mournful, beautiful melody as it floated downstream, his lips still moving, his voice echoing across the water. The head of Orpheus, severed from its body, sailed all the way to the island of Lesbos, where it finally washed ashore. There it was said to have uttered prophecies, becoming a sacred oracle. The people of Lesbos built a shrine to house it, and for centuries it was believed to speak truths about the future. This is one of the most profound images to emerge from the ancient world, a testament to the belief that true art is indestructible even by death itself. The violence of the Maenads could destroy the man, but it could not silence his song. His music and his prophetic voice persisted, literally carrying on without him. This myth explores a powerful idea that creativity and inspiration are forces that transcend the physical body. The artist may perish, but the art lives on, finding a new home and a new purpose. For the people of Lesbos, the arrival of the singing head was not just a strange story. It was a foundational legend that explained why their island became such a renowned center for poetry and music, home to great poets like Sappho and Alcaeus. They were literally blessed by the disembodied voice of the greatest musician who ever lived. It forces us to ask, where does the power of a song truly reside? Is it in the singer or in the song itself, which can float down the river of time long after its creator is gone? That disembodied, singing head speaks of art's immortality, but another myth presents an even more startling image of creation, one born not from death but from a god-splitting headache. The story of Athena's birth is one of the most peculiar in all of mythology. It begins not with love but with a prophecy. Zeus, the king of the gods, learned that his first wife, the Titaness Metis, was destined to bear children of extraordinary power. Her first child would be a daughter of immense wisdom, but her second would be a son who would overthrow Zeus, just as he had overthrown his own father. Fearing this fate, Zeus resorted to a drastic and brutal solution. He tricked Metis, convincing her to transform into a fly, and then he swallowed her whole. He believed that by containing her within his own body, he could control her power and prevent the prophecy from coming true. For a time, it seemed to work. But soon, Zeus was afflicted with a pain so terrible it threatened to crack the sky. An agonizing, thunderous headache centered in his forehead. The blacksmith god Hephaestus, seeing the king suffering, took up his axe and with one precise blow split open Zeus' skull. From that gaping wound emerged not a helpless infant, but a fully grown woman clad in gleaming armor, shaking a mighty spear and shouting a triumphant war cry. This was Athena, goddess of wisdom, craft, and strategic warfare. Her arrival was instantaneous and complete. This bizarre origin story is packed with profound meaning. On one level, it is a myth about the patriarchy appropriating the power of creation. Zeus, by swallowing the mother, effectively gives birth to the child himself, erasing the female role from the process entirely. Athena, in turn, becomes the ultimate daddy's girl, eternally loyal to Zeus and embodying the kind of rational, disciplined intelligence he valued, in stark contrast to the chaotic, emotional passions of other gods. She represents not the brute force of war like her brother Ares, but the clever strategy that wins battles through intellect. Her patronage extended to the practical arts of weaving and metalworking, and to the city that bore her name, Athens, where the Parthenon was built in her honor. The myth asks us to consider where true wisdom comes from. Is it born from raw, untamed nature, represented by the titanous Metis still living inside Zeus, or is it forged in the disciplined, strategic mind of the ruling order? Athena stands at that crossroads, a warrior who preferred diplomacy to bloodshed, a goddess of civilization who sprang directly from the mind of its king. Athena's birth from a mind-splitting headache shows how the gods could transform pain into power, but another figure in their stories had her entire life transformed into a curse. Medusa was once a beautiful priestess serving in the temple of Athena, a woman renowned for her striking hair, but after she was violated by the sea god Poseidon within the sacred temple walls, Athena's wrath fell not upon the god but upon the mortal woman. As punishment for the desecration of her shrine, Athena transformed Medusa's greatest asset into her ultimate horror. Her lovely hair writhed and twisted into a nest of venomous snakes, and her face became so terrible that any living thing meeting her gaze would instantly turn to solid stone. Exiled to a remote island with her two Gorgon sisters, she was no longer a victim but a monster, a living weapon of petrification. Her story, however, was not over. The hero Perseus was tasked with bringing back her head, an impossible mission designed to get him killed. He could not look directly at her, so the gods gifted him with tools of cunning rather than brute force. From the nymphs, he received winged sandals to fly, a cap of invisibility to hide, and a special sack to carry his prize. From Athena herself, he received a polished bronze shield, a mirror to see his target without meeting her deadly eyes. Guided by the reflection, Perseus crept up on the sleeping Gorgon and, looking only at her image in the shield, decapitated her in a single, swift stroke. Even in death, Medusa's power remained potent. Perseus kept her severed head, using it as the ultimate weapon on his journey home. He turned a titan holding up the sky to stone to steal his treasures, and he petrified a rival king who was trying to force his mother into marriage. Finally, he gave the head to Athena, who affixed it to the center of her shield, the Aegis. There, the Gorgon's face became a protective symbol, a device so fearsome it could turn enemies to stone on the battlefield. This transformation is the core of her myth's strange duality. Medusa was both a monster to be slain and a sacred emblem of protection. Her terrifying face, known as the Gorgonean, was carved onto shields, stamped onto coins, and set into city walls across the ancient world, believed to ward off evil. She embodies a profound paradox, a symbol of the terrifying power that, when properly harnessed and directed, could become the very thing that keeps you safe. Her story forces us to ask who the real monsters are and whether a curse can also be a shield. The head of Medusa could turn men to stone, but another sacred site in Greece promised to shape the very future of nations. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, within the temple of Apollo at Delphi, sat the most powerful woman in the ancient world, the Pythia. She was the oracle, the mouthpiece of the god himself, and for over 1,000 years, kings, generals, and common pilgrims made the arduous journey to seek her counsel. Before delivering her prophecies, she would undergo a strange and mystical ritual. She would descend into a sunken chamber, chew sacred laurel leaves, and breathe in a sweet-smelling vapor, a pneuma that was said to rise from a crack in the earth beneath her tripod stool. Intoxicated by this divine breath, she would slip into a trance, and her ravings, her wild cries and fragmented words would be interpreted by the temple priests and translated into the famous and famously ambiguous hexameter verses of Apollo. For centuries, this was accepted as pure divine intervention, but modern science has offered a compelling geological explanation. The region around Delphi is crisscrossed two major fault lines, and research suggests that the temple was built directly over a fissure where bituminous limestone, a type of rock rich in hydrocarbons, lies deep underground. When seismic activity occurs along these faults, it can release gases including ethylene, a sweet-smelling hydrocarbon known to produce trance-like states, euphoria, and out-of-body experiences in low concentrations. The mythical vapors may have been very real, a natural intoxicant that facilitated the Pythia's sacred frenzy. Yet the true power of Delphi lay not in the chemistry, but in the masterful interpretation of her words. The oracle's pronouncements were never straightforward commands. They were poetic riddles open to multiple understandings. When the wealthy king Croesus of Lydia asked if he should go to war with the Persian Empire, the oracle told him that if he attacked, he would destroy a great empire. Emboldened, Croesus marched to war, only to see his own empire utterly obliterated by the Persians. The prophecy was technically correct, but its ambiguity was its genius. This system of calculated vagueness made the oracle almost infallible. No matter the outcome, the priests could claim the prophecy had been fulfilled in a way the supplicant had simply failed to foresee. This gave the temple immense political influence, allowing it to act as a kind of divine diplomatic corps, subtly guiding the policies of city-states and the fates of empires through cleverly worded advice. The oracle did not just predict the future, she actively shaped it, her voice a potent instrument of soft power echoing from a gas-filled chamber deep in the Greek mountains. The prophecies of Delphi could shape the fates of kings, but no amount of clever counsel could save a mortal who believed he was more cunning than the gods themselves. That man was Sisyphus, the legendary king of Corinth, renowned for his trickery. His first great deception was against the god of death, Thanatos himself. When death came to claim him, Sisyphus pretended to be interested in the divine chains Thanatos carried, asking for a demonstration of how they worked. The moment death obligingly bound himself, Sisyphus trapped him, leaving no one on earth able to die. This act of cosmic rebellion could not stand, and the war god Ares eventually freed Thanatos, who promptly dragged the clever king to the underworld. But Sisyphus had one more trick. He instructed his wife not to perform the traditional funeral rites for his body. When he arrived in the realm of Hades, he complained to Persephone, queen of the dead, that his wife had been disrespectful and requested permission to return to the surface for just 3 days to scold her and arrange a proper burial. The queen agreed, and Sisyphus, once back in the sunlight, simply refused to return. His final punishment, when the gods finally captured him for good, was legendary in its cruelty. He was condemned for all eternity to roll a massive boulder up a steep hill. Every time he neared the summit, straining every muscle, the stone would slip from his grasp and tumble all the way back down to the plain below. And he would have to begin again forever. This myth is more than just a story about a trickster's punishment. It is a profound exploration of futility. The ancient Greeks saw it as the ultimate consequence for hubris, the arrogant belief that a human could outsmart the natural order. But in the modern era, the philosopher Albert Camus gave the myth a startling new meaning. He saw Sisyphus not as a pitiful figure but as an absurd hero. Camus argued that true despair would come if Sisyphus, for one moment, actually hoped he would succeed. The moment he accepts that his task is meaningless and embraces the struggle itself, he transcends his punishment. Each walk back down the hill becomes a moment of consciousness, a brief respite where he is free to think and to scorn the gods who condemned him. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, Camus wrote. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This interpretation transforms the myth from a simple warning into a powerful metaphor for the human condition. We all have our own boulders to push, our own repetitive, seemingly pointless tasks. The myth asks us whether we are defined by the futility of the effort or by the dignity we find in the effort itself. While Sisyphus faced his eternal struggle, another king was grappling with a stolen throne. Jason was the rightful heir to the kingdom of Iolcos, but his wicked uncle Peleus had seized power. When Jason came of age and demanded his birthright, Peleus agreed to surrender the crown on one impossible condition: that the young man retrieve the golden fleece from the far edge of the known world. This was no ordinary treasure. It was the skin of a magical winged ram, nailed to a sacred oak tree in the distant land of Colchis and guarded by a dragon that never slept. To undertake this suicidal quest, Jason gathered the greatest heroes of his age, including Heracles and Orpheus, and commissioned a magnificent ship called the Argo. These Argonauts, as they were called, would face a gauntlet of bizarre and deadly challenges on their voyage. They fought off 6-armed giants on a misty island. They navigated the clashing rocks, great cliffs that smashed together to crush any ship that tried to pass. They survived the haunting song of the sirens, with Orpheus playing his lyre even louder to drown out their deadly melody. Yet all of that was merely the prelude to the true tests that awaited them in Colchis. Its king, Aeetes, was a powerful sorcerer and had no intention of handing over his kingdom's most sacred relic. He promised Jason the fleece only if he could complete 3 tasks, each more impossible than the last. First, Jason had to yoke a pair of fire-breathing bulls with bronze hooves, creatures that scorched the earth with every step. Next, he had to plow a field using these monstrous beasts. Finally, he had to sow the field with dragon's teeth. This was not a metaphor. They were the actual teeth of a dragon, and as soon as they touched the plowed earth, each tooth sprouted into a fully armed, bloodthirsty warrior. Jason stood alone in a field, facing an army born from the soil, all intent on killing him. His success depended not on his own strength, but on the help of the king's daughter, the sorceress Medea. Hera, the queen of the gods, had made Medea fall desperately in love with Jason. She gave him a magical ointment that made him invulnerable to fire for a day, allowing him to harness the bulls. Then, for the army of dragon teeth warriors, she gave him a simple, brilliant piece of advice. She told him to throw a single stone into the middle of the newly born army. Confused and enraged, the warriors could not tell who had thrown it, and they immediately turned on each other, fighting until every last one was dead. With the tasks complete, Medea then used her magic to lull the guardian dragon to sleep, allowing Jason to snatch the golden fleece from the oak tree. They fled together, but their return was not a simple triumphant homecoming. It was a story stained with betrayal. To delay her father's pursuing fleet, Medea did the unthinkable. She murdered her own younger brother and scattered his dismembered limbs into the sea, forcing King Aeetes to stop and collect them for a proper burial. When Jason finally returned to Iolcos, he did not receive the throne peacefully. Medea again used her dark arts, tricking the daughters of the usurper Peleus into murdering their own father. This myth is far more than a simple adventure. The quest for the fleece is a story about the pursuit of legitimacy. Jason's entire journey was to reclaim what was rightfully his, a symbol of kingship and authority. Yet the methods used to secure that legitimacy were morally ambiguous, drenched in deception and horrific violence enabled by Medea's ruthless love. The golden fleece itself, a symbol of divine right and royal power, was ultimately secured through betrayal and murder, forcing us to question the very nature of heroism and the price of a crown. Jason's quest was stained with moral compromise, but the next monster presented a challenge where brute force alone was utterly useless. In the swamps of Lerna, a massive, serpentine water monster terrorized the countryside, the Lernaean Hydra. This was no ordinary beast. It possessed not one but multiple heads, the exact number varying in different tellings from 5 to 100. Its most fearsome trait, however, was its regenerative power. For every single head that was severed, 2 more would instantly grow back in its place, making the creature virtually invincible to any warrior who faced it with a simple sword. To make the task even more impossible, the Hydra's central head was immortal, completely immune to death. This was the second labor assigned to the hero Heracles, a punishment for his grievous crimes. Heracles, with his immense strength, rode into the swamp with his nephew Iolaus as his charioteer. He began by luring the Hydra from its lair with flaming arrows, then waded in to engage it in close combat. He quickly discovered the horrifying truth of its nature. With each mighty swing of his club or slash of his sword, he would crush or cut off a head, only to watch in despair as 2 new, hissing heads sprouted from the bloody stump, multiplying the threat with every blow he struck. The swamp itself seemed to be against him, as the monster's ally, a giant crab, emerged to bite his feet, adding to the chaos. Realizing conventional warfare was a path to certain defeat, Heracles had to adapt. He called to Iolaus for an unorthodox solution. As Heracles cleaved off each head, Iolaus rushed in with a burning torch and seared the fresh, bleeding neck stump shut with fire. The cauterization prevented the regeneration, stopping the new heads from growing. This clever tactic turned the tide of the battle. Finally, with all the mortal heads dispatched, Heracles dealt with the one immortal head. He severed it with a golden sword given to him by the gods and buried it deep under a heavy rock at the side of the road, ensuring it could never again threaten the living. He then dipped his arrows into the Hydra's own poisonous blood, creating weapons that would bring death to his future enemies. The myth of the Hydra is a powerful allegory for the nature of certain problems in life. Some conflicts cannot be solved by direct, repetitive force. Attacking them head-on, quite literally in this case, only makes them grow larger and more complex. The Hydra represents any seemingly unconquerable issue, from a personal struggle that keeps resurfacing in different forms to a political conflict that escalates with every attempted solution. Heracles' victory teaches a timeless lesson that overcoming an adaptive threat requires more than strength. It demands ingenuity, a trusted partner, and a willingness to change your fundamental approach. The real monster was not the heads themselves, but the system that allowed them to endlessly regenerate. Yet the poison of the Hydra could not touch the sorrow of a goddess robbed of her child. The story of Persephone's abduction is one of the most poignant in all of mythology, a tale that explains the very turning of the earth. Persephone was the beloved daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and she was gathering flowers in a sun-drenched meadow when the earth suddenly split open before her. From the chasm emerged Hades, god of the underworld, in his chariot drawn by dark steeds. He seized the terrified girl and carried her screaming into the depths, the earth sealing shut behind them as if nothing had happened. Demeter heard her daughter's fading cries and began a frantic, desperate search across the world. For 9 days and nights she roamed the earth, neither eating nor drinking, her grief so profound that all growth ceased. The land grew cold and barren, and the first winter settled over the world, threatening all of humanity with famine. It was the sun god Helios, who sees all, who finally told Demeter the truth that Zeus himself had given his brother Hades permission to take Persephone as his bride. Enraged and heartbroken, Demeter withdrew from the company of the gods, and the land remained frozen and lifeless. With the human race facing extinction, Zeus was forced to intervene. He sent Hermes, the messenger, to the underworld to demand Persephone's return. Hades agreed, but he was cunning. Before she left, he offered his wife a single pomegranate seed. In the ancient world, to eat the food of the underworld was to be bound to it forever. Persephone, perhaps out of longing or simple hunger, ate 4 of the ruby-red seeds. This single act sealed her destiny. A compromise was struck, brokered by Zeus. For each seed she had consumed, Persephone would spend 1 month of the year in the underworld as Hades' queen. For the remaining 8 months, she could return to the world above and to her mother's embrace. And so, the myth explains the seasons. When Persephone descends to the underworld each year, Demeter's grief brings autumn and winter, a time of decay and waiting. But when her daughter returns, the goddess Joy makes the earth burst forth with the flowers and abundance of spring and summer. This is not just a story about the weather. It is a profound exploration of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The ancient Greeks saw this pattern mirrored everywhere, in the harvest, in human life, and in the very structure of the cosmos. Persephone herself embodies this duality, a goddess of spring's innocence who transforms into the powerful, respected queen of the dead. Her journey gave rise to one of the most sacred and secretive religious rites in the ancient world, the Eleusinian Mysteries. For nearly 2,000 years, initiates would pilgrimage to the city of Eleusis to participate in rituals that reenacted Demeter's search and Persephone's return. The details of these ceremonies were a closely guarded secret, and revealing them was punishable by death. What we do know is that those who underwent the initiation emerged profoundly changed, having been shown a sacred vision that promised them a blessed afterlife, freeing them from the fear of death. The myth of Persephone offered more than an explanation for winter. It offered hope, a promise that just as the spring follows the cold, life in some form continues beyond the final darkness. The promise of a blessed afterlife offered hope, but the voyage home from war held only a promise of terror. Odysseus and his men, desperate for supplies, found a cave stocked with cheese and livestock. This was not a sanctuary, but the lair of Polyphemus, a Cyclops and son of the sea god Poseidon. When the giant returned, he sealed the cave entrance with a boulder no mortal could move, trapping the Greeks inside. His hospitality was a nightmare. He snatched up 2 of Odysseus's men, smashed their heads against the stone floor, and devoured them whole, washing them down with milk. This gruesome feast repeated over the next days, a horrifying display of raw, unchecked power. Odysseus knew that killing the giant in his sleep was pointless, as only Polyphemus could move the boulder that sealed their tomb. Brute force was useless. Their only hope was a terrible, cunning deception. Odysseus offered the Cyclops a skin of powerful, undiluted wine, a gift the giant gulped down greedily. When Polyphemus, now drunk and jovial, asked for the stranger's name, Odysseus replied, "My name is Nobody." Grateful for the wine, the monstrous host promised a gift, that he would eat nobody last before falling into a stupor. This was the moment. Odysseus and his men took a massive, sharpened stake of olive wood, heated its point in the fire until it glowed, and with all their strength, drove it into the single, giant eye of the sleeping Cyclops. Polyphemus awoke screaming, his eye socket sizzling, and bellowed for help from his fellow Cyclopes. When they gathered outside the cave and asked who was harming him, he roared in agony, "Nobody is killing me." The other giants, hearing this, simply shrugged and walked away, leaving him to his fate. Now blind and enraged, the Cyclops could only feel for his prey. The next morning, he rolled back the boulder to let his sheep out to graze, stationing himself at the entrance to catch any escaping men. But Odysseus had one final trick. He ordered his crew to cling to the undersides of the giant sheep, tying themselves to the animals' bellies with ropes. As the flock filed out, Polyphemus ran his hands over their backs, feeling only wool. He never thought to check underneath. Odysseus himself escaped by holding onto the thick, shaggy fleece of the largest ram. Once safely aboard their ship, Odysseus could not resist a final boast, shouting back his real name to the blinded giant. This act of pride sealed his doom, for Polyphemus then prayed to his father Poseidon, who would curse Odysseus to wander the seas for 10 more years. This brutal encounter is the ultimate clash of intellect against savagery. Polyphemus represents a primitive world of pure physical dominance where might makes right. Odysseus embodies the Greek ideal of metis, or cunning intelligence, the ability to think one's way out of an impossible situation. Yet the myth also carries a stark warning about the consequences of that intelligence. His cleverness saved his men, but his arrogance in revealing his name brought a divine curse upon them all. It forces us to ask whether true wisdom lies not just in winning the battle, but in knowing when to remain silent after the victory is won. A mortal's hands could create cloth more beautiful than anything the gods themselves produced. This was the boast of Arachne, a young woman of humble birth whose skill at the loom was so extraordinary that nymphs would abandon their groves just to watch her work. She wove scenes of breathtaking realism, her threads capturing the softness of a cloud or the shimmer of a stream with such perfection that people whispered she must have been taught by the goddess Athena herself. But Arachne, proud of her own talent, refused to give any credit to the divine. She openly declared that her skill was her own, and she challenged the goddess of weaving to a contest, daring to prove that a mortal could surpass an immortal. Athena, disguised as an old woman, came to Arachne first, warning her to show humility and withdraw her reckless challenge. But the girl only scoffed, repeating her boast and saying she wished the goddess were here so they could truly compete. At that, Athena shed her disguise, standing radiant and terrible before the mortal. The contest began. Each took a place at a loom, and the air filled with the rhythmic click of shuttles. Athena wove a tapestry of majestic and solemn power. Her central scene depicted the great hill of the Acropolis in Athens, showing the 12 gods in all their glory and her own victory in the contest that named the city after her. In the 4 corners, she wove smaller scenes, each a vivid warning, showing mortals who had dared to challenge the gods and the terrible transformations they suffered as punishment. It was a masterpiece of divine authority and a clear message: know your place. Arachne, utterly fearless, wove a very different story. Her tapestry was a work of stunning beauty and shocking defiance. It illustrated not the grandeur of the gods, but their deceptions and transgressions against mortals. She depicted Zeus in his many disguises, tricking innocent women, and Poseidon abducting and seducing. She showed Apollo and Dionysus in their own moments of cruelty or deceit. Every god was portrayed not as a figure of reverence, but as a perpetrator of petty, selfish acts. The work was flawless, its technical perfection undeniable, but its subject was an outright insult. When the tapestries were complete, even Athena could find no fault with the craft of Arachne's work. It was, in its way, perfect, but the goddess's fury at the blasphemous content was immense. She tore the beautiful, mocking tapestry to shreds and in her rage struck Arachne on the head with her shuttle. Overwhelmed with shame and terror, the young woman tried to hang herself, but Athena did not allow her that escape. Instead, she spoke a final curse, sprinkling Arachne with the juices of a magical herb. The mortal woman's body began to shrivel and shrink. Her hair fell out, her head and body tightened into a tiny, dark speck. Her fingers, so skilled and nimble, lengthened into many thin, twitching legs. She had been transformed into the first spider, condemned to hang from a thread for all time, weaving her intricate webs with her own body, an eternal reminder of her brilliant, defiant artistry. This myth is a chilling exploration of the price of hubris. Arachne's sin was not a lack of talent, it was an excess of pride. She refused to acknowledge any power greater than her own skill, and for that she was stripped of her humanity. Yet the story is deeply ambiguous. Is Arachne a cautionary tale about respecting the gods, or is she a tragic symbol of the artist punished for speaking truth to power? Her webs, like her tapestries, are works of intricate, silent beauty, a craft that continues long after the weaver herself has been forgotten. Her fate explains the origin of spiders, but it also asks a difficult question. Can a creation be so brilliant that it becomes a threat to the very order of the world? Arachne's fate was spun from threads of pride, yet on the open sea, entire ships faced annihilation from stones that moved with a mind of their own. Odysseus was warned of the wandering rocks, the planktai, a peril so absolute that no vessel known to mortals had ever sailed through them and lived. These were not fixed cliffs but living geography, great boulders that clashed together randomly, rising from the depths to grind wooden hulls into splinters. The Argonauts in their earlier quest had been forced to find another path, and even the goddess Hera had to intervene to ensure their safe passage. This was a danger that could not be outwitted with ropes or clever words, only avoided entirely. What could possibly explain such a bizarre nautical legend? One compelling theory points to the violent volcanic activity of the Mediterranean. When a volcano like Thera erupted, it would have spewed vast fields of pumice stone across the sea surface. To ancient sailors, seeing these light, floating rocks shifting with the currents could easily appear as if the very earth was adrift. In colder northern tales passed along trade routes, descriptions of icebergs calving from glaciers and colliding in the water might have fused with local lore, creating the myth of moving mountains of stone. But Homer places another, more famous pair of horrors near this same stretch of water, Scylla and Charybdis. These two offered a terrible choice, a narrow strait where sailors had to pick their poison. On one side, Charybdis was a monstrous whirlpool that sucked down entire ships 3 times a day, drowning men and all. On the other, the cliff face housed Scylla, a creature with 6 long, serpentine necks, each tipped with a ravenous head filled with 3 rows of teeth. She would snatch sailors right off the deck, a fate as certain as the whirlpool, just more personal. This trio of dangers formed a spectrum of maritime terror. The wandering rocks represented pure, chaotic chance, an inescapable trap if you were unlucky enough to stumble into them. Scylla and Charybdis, by contrast, represented a calculated, strategic risk. You had to choose to navigate the lesser of 2 evils, knowing either path would cost you dearly. Odysseus, of course, chose to face Scylla, reasoning it was better to lose 6 men to her jaws than to lose his entire ship and crew to the churning abyss. These myths gave voice to the fundamental fears of every sailor, transforming the very real dangers of unpredictable seas, treacherous currents, and hidden rocks into tangible monsters and moving mountains, giving shape to the formless terror of the deep. From the chaotic seas of Greek myth, we travel to the sun-baked banks of the Nile, where a different kind of rebirth unfolded with celestial precision. The Egyptians told of the Bennu bird, a magnificent heron-like creature that was the very soul of the sun god Ra. This was not merely a bird of beautiful plumage, it was a fundamental force of creation. The Bennu was believed to have burst into existence at the dawn of time, perched on a primordial mound that rose from the watery chaos, its solitary cry breaking the silence and setting the rhythm for all that would follow. It was a living symbol of the first sunrise, an embodiment of the daily rebirth of the sun, and a promise of life after death. The most extraordinary part of its myth was its cycle of regeneration. After living for a vast period, the Bennu would build a nest of aromatic spices like myrrh and cinnamon. There, it would be consumed by its own fiery breath, burning in a glorious pyre. From the ashes, a new, young Bennu would emerge, ready to begin the cycle anew. This powerful image of cyclical death and rebirth was deeply intertwined with the most important natural events in the Egyptian world. The heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which the Egyptians called Sopdet, occurred just before the annual, life-giving inundation of the Nile River. This celestial event, the first glimpse of the star after its long absence from the night sky, signaled that the floodwaters were coming, ready to drench the parched land and deposit rich, new silt that would ensure another year of abundant harvest. The Bennu bird was the mythological expression of this entire vital process. Its fiery death and miraculous return from the ashes mirrored the land itself, which appeared to die in the drought only to be reborn with the flood. Its connection was so strong that the bird's name is thought to be the root of the word Benben, the sacred stone that sat atop pyramids and obelisks representing that first mount of creation. When Greek travelers later encountered this myth, they adapted it into the phoenix we know today, a bird of flame and immortality. But the original Bennu was far more than a singular magical creature. It was the heartbeat of a civilization, a feathered symbol of the universe's unwavering promise that from an end, a new beginning must always rise. The promise of a new dawn embodied by the Bennu stands in stark contrast to a family where the sun seemed to refuse to rise. The story of the House of Atreus is a plunge into the deepest darkness of the human soul, a generational curse so horrific it became the blueprint for Greek tragedy. It all began with a king's monstrous crime. Tantalus, the founder of the line, sought to test the omniscience of the gods by serving them a grisly feast, his own murdered son Pelops chopped up and stewed. The gods, of course, knew instantly. They restored Pelops to life, but they cast Tantalus into eternal torment and laid a curse upon his descendants that would unfold with chilling precision. The curse reached its most infamous moment with two brothers, Atreus and Thyestes. After a bitter feud over the throne of Mycenae, Atreus pretended to reconcile with his brother and invited him to a grand banquet to seal their peace. After a lavish meal, a satisfied Thyestes leaned back and asked what had become of the sons he had brought with him. At that moment, Atreus produced their heads and feet, revealing the terrible truth. The meat Thyestes had just consumed with such relish was the flesh of his own children. This act of cannibalistic vengeance was so profound it was said the sun reeled backward in the sky in horror, refusing to shine upon such a polluted earth. Yet the curse was not satisfied. It demanded more blood. The next generation saw Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, become the powerful king who led the Greek fleet to Troy. But the winds were against them, trapped in the harbor at Aulis. A prophet revealed that the goddess Artemis demanded a sacrifice, Agamemnon's own young daughter, Iphigenia. To appease the goddess and launch his 1,000 ships, Agamemnon sent for his daughter under the pretense of a marriage to the hero Achilles. When she arrived, she was led to an altar and put to the knife. Her mother, Clytemnestra, never forgave this betrayal. While Agamemnon was away at war for 10 years, her rage festered. When he finally returned triumphant from Troy, she welcomed him with a false show of honor, only to trap him in a net in his bath and murder him with an axe, aided by her lover Aegisthus, who was, in a final twist of the knife, the sole surviving son of Thyestes, seeking his own revenge for his father's feast. Now the curse turned another generation. The duty of vengeance fell to Orpheus, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. He was torn between two sacred laws, the command to avenge his father and the absolute taboo against killing his own mother. Driven by the command of the god Apollo, Orpheus chose to avenge his father, and with his sister Electra's encouragement, he slew both Clytemnestra and her lover. But for the crime of matricide, he was immediately hounded by the Furies, ancient goddesses of vengeance who tormented him with madness, driving him relentlessly across the land. This cycle of murder, revenge, and more murder seemed endless, a self-perpetuating engine of suffering. The curse only found its resolution in a court of law. The goddess Athena established the first murder trial in Athens, with a jury of citizens to decide Orpheus' fate. The Furies argued for the old law of blood vengeance, while Apollo defended Orpheus. The vote was tied, and Athena cast the deciding ballot, acquitting Orpheus. This moment was a watershed in the Greek imagination, symbolizing the transition from primitive, cyclical clan violence to a civilized society governed by law and reason. The Furies were placated and transformed into the Eumenides, the kindly ones, protectors of the city. The curse of the House of Atreus was finally broken not by more bloodshed, but by the power of a community's judgment. This entire saga asks a terrifying question. Are we doomed to repeat the sins of our fathers, or can we, through reason and justice, finally lay our ghosts to rest? Far from the courtroom drama of Athens, on the sun-drenched island of Rhodes, a different kind of curse was said to take shape in a blacksmith's forge. The Telchines were the island's first inhabitants, a race of mysterious sea demons who were both revered and feared. They were not mere monsters, but the original artisan magicians, credited with forging the sickle sword that the god Cronus used to overthrow his father Uranus, and even creating the very scythe used by the harvest goddess Demeter. Their skill in metalworking was supernatural, but their talents did not end there. They were also powerful sorcerers, believed to have the evil eye, capable of blighting crops with a single glance and poisoning land with a mixture of Stygian water and sulfur. They could shapeshift at will and, most alarmingly, command the weather itself, summoning hail, snow, and rain at their whim. Here was the ultimate ambiguity, the creators of divine tools who are also masters of malevolent magic. Their very existence represented the double-edged nature of craft and knowledge, a power that could build civilization just as easily as it could poison it. This duality is precisely what sealed their fate. The gods grew to distrust them, viewing their potent blend of artistry and dark sorcery as an unpredictable threat. Some myths say their malicious use of the evil eye angered Zeus, while others claim Apollo, Poseidon, or even Zeus himself decided they were too dangerous to be allowed to live. In one version, the god of the sky unleashed a great flood to drown them. In another, he descended from Olympus and sank their island beneath the waves. The most chilling account states that Apollo took the form of a wolf to hunt them down one by one. Their eradication was total, a divine cleansing of a force that had become too potent and too poisonous. The legacy of the Telchines, however, lingered. They were the archetypal wise but wicked craftsmen, a warning that immense skill without moral grounding is a recipe for disaster. They remind us that the power to shape the world carries with it the terrifying responsibility to not unmake it. While the Telchines were feared for their command over the elements, a different terror haunted the quiet of the nursery. Lamia's story begins not with monstrosity but with devastating loss. She was a beautiful Libyan queen, a mortal beloved by Zeus, and their affair ignited the fiery jealousy of his wife, Hera. In a fit of vengeful rage, Hera did not strike at Lamia directly. Instead, she murdered all of Lamia's children, wiping out her entire lineage. Some versions say Hera forced Lamia herself to devour her own offspring. The grief and madness that followed were unimaginable. Zeus, perhaps feeling some pity for his ruined lover, granted her a terrible power. He gave her the ability to remove her own eyes from their sockets, a supernatural release from the horror she had witnessed, though she could only replace them when she needed to hunt. But this gift did not heal her, it twisted her. Her profound maternal grief curdled into a bottomless hatred for all mothers who still had their children. She was transformed into a monstrous serpentine creature, condemned to slither through the darkness, forever seeking to steal and devour the children of others. She became the ancient world's ultimate bogeyman, a name mothers whispered to frighten disobedient children into behaving. The myth says she specifically targeted infants and young children, her actions a permanent, violent reenactment of her own trauma. This story is far more than a simple monster tale. It is a powerful, if disturbing, expression of deep-seated cultural anxieties. In an age of high infant mortality, the Lamia myth gave a tangible, monstrous form to the invisible threat of sudden childhood illness or death. For mothers experiencing postpartum depression or the all-consuming fear of losing a child, Lamia personified that internal dread, an external monster onto which they could project their own unspeakable fears. Her legend served as a cautionary framework, a way to explain the unexplainable tragedy of a child's death. The myth also explores the dark side of maternal love, showing how the most powerful human bond, when shattered, can warp into its most horrific opposite. Lamia is a pitiable figure, a victim of divine cruelty whose own suffering then creates an endless cycle of victimization. Her story forces us to ask whether a monster is born or made by unbearable pain. A prophecy foretold that a son would kill his father and marry his mother, a horror so absolute that King Laius of Thebes ordered his own infant boy to be abandoned on a mountainside, his ankles pierced and pinned together. He was certain he had cheated fate, but the child did not die. A shepherd found him and named him Oedipus, meaning swollen foot, and he was raised as a prince in the distant court of Corinth. Years later, Oedipus himself learned of the same terrible prophecy. Believing his Corinthian parents were his real family, he fled his home in a desperate attempt to spare them, setting out on the road that would lead him directly to his tragic destiny. On that journey, he encountered a haughty old man in a chariot at a narrow crossroads. A quarrel erupted over the right of way, and in the ensuing fight, Oedipus killed the man, unknowingly fulfilling the first half of the prophecy. The man was his true father, King Laius. He then traveled on to Thebes, a city terrorized by the Sphinx, a monster that devoured anyone who could not answer her riddle. Oedipus solved it, freeing the city and earning the gratitude of its people. As a reward, he was given the hand of the recently widowed queen, Jocasta, his own mother. For years, he ruled as a wise and powerful king, and they had 4 children together, all while remaining utterly blind to the monstrous reality of his life. The truth was only unraveled by a relentless search for a different truth, the identity of King Laius's murderer, whose presence was causing a plague to ravage Thebes. The blind prophet Tyreus was the first to reveal the horrifying answer, but Oedipus, in his pride, refused to believe it. It was only through a series of painful revelations from a shepherd who had been present on the mountain long ago that the full, awful picture came together. Jocasta realized the truth first and hanged herself in despair. Oedipus, upon discovering her body, seized the golden brooches from her robe and plunged them into his own eyes, physically blinding himself for the spiritual blindness that had defined his reign. The man who had seen the answer to the Sphinx's riddle could not see the truth of his own life until it was too late. This myth is the ultimate exploration of the conflict between fate and free will. Every character makes conscious, logical choices to avoid the prophecy, and it is those very choices that ensure its fulfillment. Laius sends his son away to save himself, and Oedipus leaves Corinth to save his parents, each act of defiance a step toward the destined tragedy. It forces a chilling question: does knowing the future give you the power to change it, or does that knowledge itself become the very instrument that locks the future in place? The story's influence echoes far beyond ancient theater. Sigmund Freud used the tale to name the Oedipus complex, his controversial theory about a child's unconscious desires, though the myth itself is about the horror of fulfilling such a taboo, not the desire for it. More fundamentally, the story asks us what it truly means to know ourselves. Oedipus' journey is a search for identity, a quest for knowledge that leads to self-destruction, yet also, in the end, to a terrible form of self-awareness. He is a warning that some truths are so shattering that we build entire lives to avoid seeing them, and that the universe might demand we pay the price for that blindness. The dense snow of Mount Erymanthus crunched underfoot, a wilderness so untamed it was home to a beast of pure, rampaging force. This was the Erymanthian boar, a creature of such immense size and ferocity that it terrorized the countryside, uprooting entire orchards and leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. For his 4th labor, Heracles was commanded to bring the monster back alive, a task that required not just strength but immense cunning and restraint. He could not simply kill it. He had to capture the embodiment of raw, natural chaos and deliver it, breathing and furious, to his cousin King Eurystheus. Heracles pursued the boar through the deep winter forests, driving it higher and higher into the mountains until, exhausted, the great beast became trapped in a snowdrift. Seizing the moment, Heracles netted it and hoisted the colossal, squealing animal onto his shoulders to begin the long journey back. His path took him through the lands of the centaurs, the mythical half-man, half-horse creatures. Seeking shelter, he visited the cave of the centaur Pholus, who was known to be wise and hospitable. Pholus welcomed the hero, but he made a fatal mistake when he opened a great jar of wine to share. This was no ordinary wine. It was the sacred wine of all the centaurs, belonging to their entire community, and its powerful aroma carried on the mountain air. The other centaurs, smelling their communal treasure being broached, flew into a maddened, drunken rage. They descended on Pholus's cave, armed with rocks and torches, demanding the wine. What followed was a chaotic, wine-fueled battle. Heracles fought them off, his arrows driving the frenzied centaurs back. In the midst of the brawl, the hero accidentally revealed his captive, holding up the monstrous, writhing boar in a moment of sheer, terrifying spectacle. The sight of the giant beast in the grip of a demigod, combined with the fighting and the scent of wine, sent the centaurs into even greater confusion, scattering them in panic. Tragically, amid the chaos, a single drop of poison from one of Heracles' Hydra blood arrows fell onto Pholus's foot. The gentle centaur, who had only meant to be a good host, died almost instantly from the slightest touch of the venom. When Heracles finally arrived at the court of Eurystheus, he completed the labor in the most dramatic way possible. He strode into the throne room and presented the snarling, monstrous boar. The king, in a fit of sheer terror, scrambled to hide, diving into a giant bronze storage jar buried in the ground for just such an occasion. This labor reveals a recurring theme in the hero's story, that his immense power often created unintended collateral damage. He succeeded in his impossible task, but his victory was shadowed by the death of an innocent friend, a reminder that even the greatest strength could not always control the chaos it unleashed. The Stymphalian marshes were a place of unnatural silence, choked by a pestilence that walked on wings. Heracles stood before this stagnant water, his sixth labor to rid the land of the Stymphalian birds. These were no ordinary birds. They were monstrous, man-eating creatures with beaks of bronze and feathers of sharpened iron, which they could launch from their bodies like a volley of arrows. Their droppings were so toxic they could poison the very water and soil, and they had taken over the marsh, making it a treacherous, uninhabitable wasteland. The hero could not simply wade in and fight them, for the ground was too soft to bear his weight, and the sheer number of birds would have overwhelmed him in an instant. He needed a new strategy, one that relied on ingenuity over brute force. The goddess Athena, ever his patron, appeared and presented him with a simple but brilliant tool, a massive bronze rattle forged by the god Hephaestus. Heracles took his position on a high rock overlooking the marsh and shook the rattle with all his might. The resulting clamor was deafening, an unbearable metallic clang that shattered the swamp's eerie quiet. Startled from their roosts by the terrifying noise, the entire flock of birds shot into the air in a chaotic, shrieking cloud. With their sanctuary disturbed and their formation broken, they became vulnerable. Heracles, a master archer, then picked them off one by one with his poison-tipped arrows, while the few that escaped flew so far away they were never seen in Greece again. This peculiar myth resonates with a very real human struggle. The Stymphalian birds can be seen as a powerful metaphor for an invasive species or a virulent plague. The description of their metallic feathers and toxic droppings evokes the image of a locust-like swarm that devastates agriculture and renders land unusable, a catastrophic event for an ancient society. The hero's solution is equally telling. He does not confront the problem directly, but uses a tool to disrupt their environment, forcing them into a situation where they can be managed. This reflects an early understanding of pest control, using noise or other methods to drive a destructive population from its stronghold. The myth transforms a collective memory of ecological disaster into an epic confrontation, where the ultimate monster is not a single beast, but a multiplying environmental threat that requires a clever, almost technological, solution to defeat. The legend of Atlantis begins not with an epic poem, but with a philosophical dialogue. The Greek philosopher Plato first described this magnificent island kingdom around 360 BC in his works Timaeus and Critias. He placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, a vast and powerful empire that existed 9,000 years before his own time. According to his tale, Atlantis was a marvel of engineering and culture, with concentric rings of land and water, grand canals, and a spectacular palace at its heart. Its people grew arrogant with their own power and perfection, and they launched a war to conquer the entire ancient world. It was then that the gods intervened. In a single terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever beneath the waves. For Plato, this was never meant as a historical account. It was a moral allegory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris. He created Atlantis as the perfect society that fell from grace, a fictional example of what happens when a civilization becomes morally corrupt and seeks to dominate others, provoking the wrath of the divine. Its destruction was a philosophical lesson on the inevitable collapse of any society that abandons virtue for imperial ambition. Yet this fictional parable took on a life of its own. Later writers, ignoring its original context, began to treat Atlantis as a real, lost civilization. This sparked a relentless, centuries-long quest to find its sunken ruins. Theories have placed it everywhere from the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean island of Santorini, which was partially destroyed by a massive volcanic eruption. Some have suggested the Azores, the Bahamas, or even Antarctica. This search has fueled countless works of pseudo-archaeology, with proponents claiming that Atlanteans possessed advanced technology or that they were the ancestors of all ancient civilizations from the Egyptians to the Maya. The myth endures because it taps into a profound human curiosity, a longing for a lost golden age, and the romantic mystery of a world swallowed by the sea. It forces us to wonder why we are so captivated by the idea of a sunken city. Is it the allure of a hidden history, or is it the chilling reminder that even the greatest empires are not immune to the forces of nature and the consequences of their own pride? The worship of Cybele arrived in Rome not as a gentle prayer, but as a violent, ecstatic storm. She was the Great Mother, a Phrygian goddess of mountains and wild nature, whose power was both creative and savagely destructive. Her most sacred myth centered on a mortal youth named Atreus, a shepherd of extraordinary beauty with whom the goddess fell deeply in love. In a fit of divine jealousy, or perhaps driven by a prophecy that Atreus would be unfaithful, Cybele drove the young man into a mad frenzy. In this state of delirious agony, Atreus fled to the mountains, and beneath the solemn branches of a pine tree, he took a sharp stone and castrated himself, bleeding to death at the foot of the tree as his life ebbed away. Overwhelmed with grief, Cybele mourned his death, but she also ensured he would not be entirely lost. She granted him a form of immortality, causing his body to never decay and his hair to continue growing, a symbol of enduring life springing from a brutal act of self-destruction. This intense myth of love, madness, and mutilation formed the core of a religion that was shockingly visceral. Her most devoted priests, known as the Galli, would reenact the climactic moment of Atreus' story during their initiation into her cult. In a public ceremony filled with wild music, frenzied dancing, and the rhythmic clash of cymbals and drums, these men would work themselves into an ecstatic trance. Then, in a burst of divine fervor, they would castrate themselves, offering their manhood to the goddess in a permanent, physical embodiment of their devotion. After this act, they would run through the streets, tossing their severed flesh into the houses of strangers. Any household that received this grim gift was then obligated to provide the new priest with women's clothing and finery, for the Galli lived the rest of their lives as celibate, feminized eunuchs in service to the Great Mother. This was a faith of raw, unmediated emotion, a stark contrast to the formal, state-sanctioned rituals of Rome's official religion. So why did the Roman Senate, a body known for its order and discipline, officially import this chaotic foreign cult during the desperate years of the Second Punic War? A prophecy declared that Rome would only defeat its Carthaginian enemy if it brought the Great Mother to the city. They brought her sacred black stone from Pessinus and built her a temple on the Palatine Hill. Yet the Romans were deeply ambivalent about the cult's practices. Roman citizens were actually forbidden from becoming Galli, a clear attempt to harness the goddess's protective power while containing her socially disruptive frenzy. The cult of Cybele and Attis represents a profound human longing for a direct, transformative encounter with the divine, no matter how painful or extreme the cost. It asks us what we are willing to sacrifice, not just in token, but in our very flesh, to feel a power greater than ourselves, and how a civilization struggling for survival could try to embrace that chaotic power without being consumed by it. Even the most extreme devotion could not compare to a creature whose very existence defied nature. The basilisk was known as the King of Serpents, a title it earned not through size, but through a power so absolute it left no room for challenge. Its origin was as bizarre as its abilities. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder described it as a small serpent, no more than 12 fingers long, yet it was crowned with a distinctive white mark on its head resembling a diadem. This regal appearance belied a horrifying genesis, for the basilisk was said to be born from the egg of an old rooster, incubated by a toad or a serpent. This unnatural conception, a cock's egg, was the ultimate perversion of the natural order, resulting in a being that was poison incarnate. Its gaze was lethal, capable of killing any living thing that met its eyes, and its breath was so venomous it could wither plants and shatter stones. Simply to look upon it meant death, and to be near it meant suffocation from its toxic exhalations. The creature left a trail of desolation in its wake, a path of sterile earth where nothing could ever grow again. Its only weakness was the scent of a weasel, the one creature immune to its power and driven by nature to hunt it, or the sound of a rooster's crow, which could supposedly make it convulse and die. This small but deadly serpent of Greek and Roman lore underwent a dramatic transformation in the medieval imagination. As the myth traveled north and was copied and recopied in bestiaries, the basilisk began to fuse with other creatures. It slowly grew wings, gained the head and legs of a rooster, and eventually became the cockatrice, a true hybrid monster. This new form, part snake and part bird, was often depicted as being born from a chicken's egg hatched by a serpent, inverting its original origin story. The cockatrice retained the basilisk's deadly gaze and corrosive breath, but its new, more familiar avian form made it an even more potent symbol of evil and heresy in Christian art. It became the enemy of all that was pure, a monster that could be slain only by seeing its own reflection in a mirror, turning its own annihilating power back upon itself. Why did this particular monster capture such enduring fear? The basilisk and its descendant, the cockatrice, represented a terror of contamination. They were not just animals to be fought, but walking plagues, embodiments of miasma and corruption. In a world without germ theory, the idea of a creature whose mere presence could blight the land and kill from a distance gave a tangible form to the invisible threat of pestilence. The myth explained sudden, unexplained deaths in the wilderness or the failure of crops in a field. It was a warning against the unnatural, a symbol of how the world itself could be poisoned by something that should never have been born. A riddle hung over the city of Thebes like a death sentence. The creature that delivered it was as terrifying as it was enigmatic. The Sphinx was a hybrid nightmare, a winged monster with the body of a lion, the face of a woman, and a serpent's tail. She perched on a high rock outside the city gates, blocking all passage and posing her single, infamous question to any traveler who dared approach. The penalty for failure was immediate and brutal, a swift, violent death as the monster devoured those who could not unravel her words. Her riddle was deceptively simple. What creature, she asked, walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? One by one, the city's finest minds failed and perished, their deaths plunging Thebes deeper into despair. The answer, when it finally came, was not from a king or a warrior, but from an exile, Oedipus, a man fleeing a terrible prophecy of his own. He confronted the Sphinx and with calm certainty gave the solution. The creature, he declared, is a human being. A human crawls on all 4s as an infant in the morning of life, walks upright on 2 legs in the noon of adulthood, and uses a cane as a 3rd leg in the evening of old age. The moment Oedipus spoke the correct answer, the Sphinx's power was broken. In some versions, she threw herself from the rock in sheer frustration, her purpose defeated. In others, she simply vanished, her curse lifted. This was more than a test of wits, it was a confrontation with the very nature of existence. The Sphinx, a composite of different animals, represented the chaotic, untamed forces of the world that defy easy categorization. Her riddle was a mirror held up to humanity, forcing a moment of profound self-recognition. To answer it correctly, one had to understand the entire arc of a human life, from helpless beginning to frail end. The myth suggests that the greatest terror we face is not a monster from the outside, but the unsettling truth of our own mortality, the inevitable decline that every person must face. The Sphinx did not just ask a riddle, she demanded that those who sought to pass look directly at the fleeting, 3-act drama of their own lives. And in that moment of clarity, Oedipus did not just defeat a monster, he defined what it means to be human, a truth so simple and so devastating that it had been hidden in plain sight all along. High above the storm-tossed decks of ancient ships, a strange light would sometimes dance in the rigging. This eerie blue glow, known today as St. Elmo's fire, was not a sign of doom to the sailors who saw it, but a miraculous omen of rescue. They called this phenomenon the Dioscuri, the divine twins Castor and Pollux appearing in their moment of greatest need. The story of these brothers is a powerful legend of loyalty that literally transcended death. Castor was a mortal prince, a master horseman, while his twin Pollux was the immortal son of Zeus. They were inseparable, the closest of companions in every adventure. When Castor was killed in a battle, Pollux was shattered. His own immortality meant nothing without his brother. He begged his father Zeus to let them remain together. Moved by this profound devotion, Zeus offered them a unique fate. They would never have to be parted. He placed their spirits in the sky as the constellation Gemini, the twins, forever linked in the stars. But their story did not end there. The twins became the divine protectors of sailors, a role born from their own seafaring exploits with Jason and the Argonauts. When a violent storm threatened to shatter a ship's mast and send the crew to a watery grave, the legend says these twin lights would appear at the highest point of the ship. Their calm, glowing presence was a promise that the storm would pass and the ship would find safe harbor. This was more than just a pretty myth explaining a weather event. For the men clinging to life on a wooden deck in a raging sea, the appearance of the Dioscuri was a tangible sign of hope. It was the universe telling them they were not alone, that the bond of brotherhood, even between a god and a mortal, was strong enough to calm the heavens themselves. The electrical discharge of St. Elmo's fire is a natural phenomenon, but the meaning the ancients gave it reveals something deeper about the human spirit. It shows how we look for patterns of care and connection in the chaotic forces of nature, transforming a simple static glow into a story of love so strong it refused to be broken by the grave. The promise of brotherly devotion could not protect a hero from the darker currents of magic. Jason's own story after the triumph of the Golden Fleece became entangled with the powers of his wife, the sorceress Medea. Her most shocking demonstration of power involved a simple ram. To prove she could restore lost vitality, she took the aged, weary animal, slit its throat, and cut its body into pieces. She then placed the dismembered parts into a bronze cauldron, boiling them with a potent brew of herbs and enchanted roots. From that seething pot, a young, vigorous lamb leaped forth, reborn and full of life. This was not a resurrection from true death, but a terrifying rejuvenation, a forced reversal of time's natural flow using dismemberment and a magical vessel. This bizarre ritual echoes far beyond the Greek world, finding a haunting parallel in the Welsh tales of the Mabinogion. The mythical king Bran the Blessed, a giant of a man, was mortally wounded in battle by a poisoned spear. Before he died, he instructed his 7 loyal followers to cut off his head and carry it with them back to Britain. The companions did as they were told, and for 87 years, Bran's severed head remained miraculously alive, speaking prophecies and entertaining them as if he were still their king. They lived in a timeless state of joy, unaware of the decades passing outside their hall, until one of them finally opened a forbidden door, breaking the enchantment and releasing them back into the flow of time. Both of these myths center on a sacred vessel, a cauldron or a hall, that holds the power to suspend the normal rules of life and decay. They reflect a deep, primal human anxiety about mortality and a desperate longing to cheat it, not necessarily through eternal life, but through a restoration of youth and strength. The cauldron becomes a powerful symbol of this desire, a container for transformation where the old order is violently broken down so a new one can emerge. Yet these stories are also deeply unsettling. Medea's act, while miraculous, is gruesome and unnatural, a prelude to the darker deeds she would later commit. The timeless feast of Bran's head is a beautiful stasis, but it is a life outside of life, a haunting existence that cannot last. Why would such disturbing images of dismemberment and rebirth resonate across different cultures? Perhaps because they acknowledge a terrifying truth that true transformation is never a gentle process. It requires the complete shattering of the old self before any renewal can possibly begin. But the terror of the night held more than just whispers. It could take on a beautiful, alluring form, a trap for the lonely and the unwary. This was the Impusa, a shape-shifting monster sent by the dark goddess Hecate to haunt the crossroads and deserted places. She was a creature of pure deception, a daughter of the underworld who most often appeared as a stunningly attractive young woman. Her purpose was to lure solitary young men, drawing them in with the promise of companionship or passion. Yet this beautiful facade hid a monstrous reality. One of her legs was made of bronze, while the other was the hoof of a donkey, a grotesque clue to her true nature that she worked hard to conceal. Once she had her victim isolated and vulnerable, the illusion would shatter. Her lovely features would twist into something horrific, and she would reveal her true intent to devour the flesh and drink the warm blood of the mortal she had seduced. This myth was a powerful way for ancient Greeks to explain 2 deeply unsettling phenomena: the sudden, unexplained deaths of young men, and the primal fear of what lurks in the darkness just beyond the firelight. She was a vampire-like figure long before the concept was fully defined, a personification of the dangers that could befall those who wandered alone at night. Her ability to change shape tapped into a fundamental anxiety, the fear that you cannot trust your own senses, that a friendly face might be a mask for a predatory heart. How many tales of a traveler disappearing after meeting a mysterious woman on a moonlit road were explained by the legend of the Impusa? She was the embodiment of the unknown stranger, the beautiful danger that promises everything but delivers only a grisly end. Her story served as a stark warning to be cautious of offers that seem too good to be true, especially when they appear from the shadows. Their legendary archery skills came at a terrifying physical cost. The Amazons were said to be a society of unmatched female warriors, a tribe that lived entirely without men, their society a radical inversion of the Greek world. To master the bow, the central instrument of their power, they were rumored to perform a brutal act of bodily modification, cutting off or cauterizing their right breast to prevent it from interfering with the bowstring's flight. This single shocking detail, whether true or not, encapsulated everything the Greeks found both fascinating and terrifying about them. They were depicted as the ultimate barbarians, yet also as worthy adversaries for the greatest Greek heroes. Heracles, for his ninth labor, was tasked with stealing the war belt of their queen, Hippolyta. In some versions, he killed her to get it. Theseus, the slayer of the Minotaur, was said to have abducted an Amazon queen, sparking a massive invasion of Athens itself, where the warrior women laid siege to the Acropolis. These stories served a clear purpose for Greek society, defining their own civilized, male-dominated identity in opposition to a powerful, foreign, female-led threat. The myth was so persistent that ancient writers placed them in specific, far-flung locations, from the plains of Scythia north of the Black Sea to the coast of Libya. For a long time, they were dismissed as pure fantasy, a patriarchal nightmare. But archaeology has begun to uncover a startling truth. Across the Eurasian steppes, in burial mounds known as kurgans, archaeologists have found the graves of women buried with the full honors of warriors. These skeletons, dating back to the time of the Scythians and Sarmatians, are accompanied by quivers full of arrows, iron swords, spears, and armor. Some even show signs of battle injuries. These were real women who rode horses, fought in battles, and were revered by their people. They were not a society entirely without men, but a culture where women could clearly hold the status and occupation of a warrior. The myth of the Amazons appears to be a distorted, exaggerated reflection of these real steppe nomads whom the Greeks encountered and feared at the edges of their known world. The legend asks a profound question about how history is written, how the reality of powerful women from a foreign culture could be transformed into a cautionary tale of inverted gender roles, a society so formidable that the Greeks could only imagine it by removing men from the picture entirely. A city of sin sank beneath the waves, but not in the warm Mediterranean. Far to the north, in the Celtic legends of Brittany, lies the tale of Wise, a city more magnificent than any other, built by the King Gradlon on land reclaimed from the sea. Its protection was a feat of divine engineering, a massive dike and a single, magnificent gate that held back the entire ocean. The key to this life-giving gate was not kept by a god or a minister, but was a singular object of trust, a golden key worn around the pious King Gradlon's own neck. Within its walls, shielded from the sea's fury, Wise grew unimaginably wealthy and, according to the legends, deeply corrupt. The king's daughter, Princess Dahat, was the heart of this decadence, leading the city in wild, hedonistic celebrations that openly mocked the old virtues. Her downfall arrived in the form of a mysterious, handsome stranger who won her heart during a masquerade. After a night of revelry, he convinced her that he desired only one thing as a token of her love, the golden key from her father's neck. Blinded by passion and the thrill of the moment, Dahat crept into the sleeping king's chamber and stole the key. She gave it to her demon lover, who immediately rode to the great dike gate and unlocked it. The ocean surged through, an unstoppable wall of water that began to devour the city. King Gradlon awoke to the roar of the flood, and seizing his daughter, he mounted his magical horse and fled the drowning streets. As they raced up the rising slopes, a divine voice boomed from the heavens, commanding the king to cast the wicked Dahat into the waves. He hesitated, but the voice was insistent, and as the waters licked at his horse's hooves, he finally pushed his daughter into the churning sea. The moment she sank beneath the waves, the waters ceased their pursuit, and the city of Wise was lost forever, leaving only the bells of its cathedrals to be heard by fishermen on calm, quiet days. This powerful myth of a sunken city shares a deep resonance with the Greek story of Atlantis, another advanced civilization punished for its moral failings by being swallowed by the sea. Both serve as potent cautionary tales about hubris and divine retribution. Yet the story of Wise feels more intimate, its tragedy hinging not on an army's ambition, but on a single, fatal act of betrayal by a lovesick princess. It echoes the universal theme of the Great Flood found in cultures worldwide, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical story of Noah, where a corrupt world is cleansed by water. These stories all wrestle with the same profound question: how does a society that has mastered its environment, building walls against the very sea, ultimately fall? The answer, it seems, is never the force of the water outside, but the weakness of the character within. A giant king carried his own severed head across the sea. This is the story of Bran the Blessed, a figure of immense power from Welsh mythology whose legend centers on a journey that began with his death. In a great battle against the Irish, Bran was struck by a poisoned spear, a wound he knew was mortal. But before his life faded, he gave his 7 loyal companions a strange and solemn command. He instructed them to cut off his head and carry it with them back to the island of Britain. They obeyed their king, and what followed was an experience outside of time itself. The head of Bran did not decay. It remained alive, its eyes seeing, its lips speaking. For 87 years, the king's companions lived in a state of enchanted joy, feasting and listening to their lord's wisdom and prophecies, completely unaware of the decades passing in the world outside their hall. They were trapped in a beautiful, timeless stasis, their loyalty rewarded with an endless feast presided over by the talking head of their leader. This period was known as the entertaining of the noble head, a golden age of companionship that could not last. The enchantment was finally broken when one of the men, driven by a sudden curiosity, opened a forbidden door that faced the mainland of Cornwall. In that instant, the spell shattered. The weight of all those lost years crashed down upon them, and the memory of their king's death, along with the sorrow of the world, flooded back into their hearts. They could no longer stay in their magical refuge. Their duty was now clear. They had to fulfill Bran's final order and bury his head in the White Hill of London, facing toward France. They carried the now silent head to that sacred spot and laid it to rest, believing that as long as it remained there, it would act as a powerful talisman, protecting the island of Britain from all foreign invasion. This bizarre myth reveals the profound sacredness of the head in Celtic belief. The head was not just the seat of the soul, it was considered the very source of a person's power, their wisdom, and their life force. A severed head was not necessarily a sign of defeat, but could become a vessel of enduring protection and prophecy. For a king like Bran, his head was a symbol of his sovereignty, and its burial in the land's heart was the ultimate act of guardianship, a way for him to rule and protect his people even from beyond the grave. This story forces us to wonder about the true nature of loyalty and kingship. Is a king's power in his living body, or does it reside in the legacy and the sacred promises he leaves behind, a voice that continues to guide long after he is gone? From the whispering head of Orpheus to the self-devouring house of Atreus, these 30 stories form a tapestry of the profoundly strange. They are not merely ancient entertainment, but a deep and resonant language, speaking of primal fears, unanswerable questions, and the fundamental values of the cultures that birthed them. These myths gave shape to the terror of the open sea in the form of clashing rocks and whirlpools. They personified the dread of a child's sudden death in the figure of Lamia, and explored the horror of fate itself through the tragedy of Oedipus. The self-mutilation of the galley and the castration of Attis reveal a desperate, visceral longing for a connection with the divine, while the cleverness of Odysseus and the strength of Heracles celebrated the human qualities their societies held most dear. Every bizarre detail, from Medusa's petrifying gaze to the regenerating heads of the Hydra, served a purpose. They were attempts to explain the unexplainable, to codify the natural world, and to navigate the complex terrain of the human heart. The ancient Mediterranean was a world alive with meaning, where every rustle in the leaves or strange dream could be a message from the gods. These stories were their way of mapping that mysterious terrain. So, which of these incredible tales resonated most deeply with you? Was it the tragic fate of a grief-stricken monster, the cunning of a hero trapped in a cave, or the shocking transformation of a proud weaver? Share your own favorite bizarre myth from any culture in the comments below. And if this journey into the heart of historical mystery captivated you, be sure to subscribe for more explorations into the forgotten corners of